He thought it was funny to leave me at a gas station. Years later, he regretted it bitterly. Jane Carter tightened the collar of her worn, threadbare jacket against the biting wind, the chilly air slipping past the frayed fabric and nipping her skin. The gas station was gray and unkind that late afternoon in early autumn, its flickering neon sign casting uneasy shadows over the cracked concrete. Jane shifted the groceries in her plastic bag, the paper rustling faintly as she glanced nervously across the street, hoping to catch a glimpse of Brandon's blue pickup before it roared away again. The ache in her chest was cold and sharp, a familiar throb of disappointment mixed with the sting of humiliation that had been etched deep into her heart for the last decade. She stood near the glass doors of the convenience store, the dull murmur of muffled conversations inside contrasting with the sharp gusts of wind that rattled the old station. The hum of passing cars blended with the distant honk of a truck trying to find its way. But none of it mattered to Jane at that moment. All she could hear was the shrinking absence left behind when Brandon had slammed his truck door and sped away without a word. He had thought it was funny, really funny, to leave her stranded in a place no one she knew frequented. A joke, he had said with a crooked grin before pulling out of the parking lot. His laughter echoed in her ears like a cruel soundtrack, making her feel smaller than the cracked parking lines beneath her feet. Around her, the gas station was alive with a cheap buzz of transient strangers, a salesman with a plastic name tag on his chest, a family hurriedly refilling their tank before a road trip, and a handful of regulars nodding to the clerk behind the counter. Some glanced her way, eyes heavy with judgment or fleeting curiosity, but none came to offer help. Jane's cheeks burned, and a lump rose in her throat as she fought off tears that threatened to spill. She tried to steady her breath, but the weight of everyone's gaze wrapped around her like a shroud, trapping her in a moment that felt endless and unforgiving. Years of struggle had taught Jane resilience. Born and raised in a small town where opportunity was as rare as kindness, she was no stranger to hardship. Raised by a single mother who worked double shifts cleaning offices, Jane had learned early that life often demanded more than you were ready to give. She was humble and kind, with hands calloused from work at the diner and evenings spent caring for her little brother while her mother slept. But the world didn't always see her strength. It often saw the worn coat, the tired eyes, the voice laced with a quiet accent. That day, abandoned at the gas station, Jane felt that invisibility more keenly than ever. She remembered how Brandon always boasted about his charm, about how people laughed at his jokes, but never imagined those jokes could cut so deeply. The once promising relationship had unraveled in quiet moments of neglect until that final scene, a theater of cruelty, screened under harsh fluorescent lights. Jane's heart was raw. The sting of betrayal, fresh as the tears, stole silently down her cheeks. She clenched her fists, the sting of fingernails digging into her palms, grounding her, anchoring her to a painful reality she couldn't yet escape. Why would he do that? She whispered to the empty station, voice cracking under the weight of her own disbelief. She stared at the dim glow of the pump numbers, the rhythmic blinking almost mocking in their harmless regularity. Each passing second felt like an eternity, yet she also understood. The moment was a reflection of years of being unseen and undervalued, a painful reminder of how someone who claimed to care could find entertainment in breaking someone else so completely. Limping through the aftermath of that day, Jane vowed to herself that no one would ever make her feel that small again. But promises to oneself were easy to break when the world kept turning, indifferent to the scars left behind. As the cool evening deepened and the pale streetlights began to flicker on, Jane wrapped the edges of her jacket tighter around her arms and took the first shaky step away from the gas station, away from that cruel memory. Deep down, she wondered if someone out there still saw her, beyond the stained jacket and quiet demeanor. If someone would ever notice the fierce heart beneath. Sometimes, late at night, when the house was silent and the world outside faded away. She replayed those moments, the laughter, the betrayal, the emptiness, as if expecting some answer to fall into place. How many more times would a person have to be humiliated before they found the courage to fight back? Would her story ever matter? The gas station had been a crossroads, a place where one dream broke, yet another was waiting to be forged from the embers. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Jane often wondered, inviting the listener to sit in her battered heart and see the world through her fatigued eyes. The road ahead was uncertain, but her spirit, battered but unbroken, sparked with a quiet determination to rise again. The days after that humiliating afternoon at the gas station felt like a blur for Jane Carter, each one dragging behind her like a stubborn shadow refusing to lift. The echo of Brandon's laughter haunted every passing moment, a merciless reminder of how easily someone she trusted could turn her pain into a spectacle. He had been more than just a boyfriend. He had been the person she believed would protect her, hold her through the worst storms. Yet, in the harsh flicker of the gas station's fluorescent lights, she realized how wrong she was. His smile, once warm, now seemed carved from stone, a mask hiding apathy and cruel indifference. At work, in the cramped diner where she scraped together daily wages, Jane felt eyes focusing on her with thinly veiled pity or amusement when the story spread. Whispers in the break room, half-suppressed giggles when she passed, and that one coworker who bluntly asked, "So, did he leave you stranded for real?" The question was more like a jab, designed to sting. Jane forced herself to nod, biting back the words lodged stubbornly in her throat. Each snide comment, each cold glance, only dug deeper into the chasm of her shame. As if the accident at the gas station wasn't bad enough, but now she'd become the town's unofficial joke, the girl who got left behind. Her internal world raged, mixing anger and self-doubt in a vicious storm. Why hadn't she seen the signs sooner? Why had she believed in someone who found humor in her despair? She replayed Brandon's words, his smirk, the ease with which he dismissed her, over and over, as if trying to pinpoint a moment where she could have stopped it all. But no matter how many times she searched, there was only silence and darkness. That silence became almost suffocating, pressing her down until she felt her voice, the one that had once been full of hope and dreams, grow faint and lost. At home, the walls of her small apartment seemed to close in, the flickering kitchen light casting shadows that mirrored her turmoil. Jane's mother, exhausted from long shifts and the weight of their tiny household, listened when Jane finally broke down, her hands trembling as she recounted the day's cruel events. But the sympathy in her mother's eyes was tinged with worry. She knew those kinds of wounds were slow to heal and often left scars invisible to the world. "You're stronger than you think, honey," her mother whispered one evening, pressing her hand over Jane's heart. Yet even those words, meant to comfort, seemed too fragile to repair the rupture within. Brandon's absence became a gaping hole in her routine. Each missed call and unanswered message a reminder that he had never intended to come back. The juxtaposition of his betrayal and the town's gossip hardened Jane's resolve, but also seeded a deep loneliness. She couldn't escape the look she got on the street, the judgment wrapped in feigned concern. People spoke of her downfall as though it defined her entire existence, failing to see the woman beneath the surface, wrestling with the debris of her dignity. The gas station was no longer just a place. It was a symbol, a brutal benchmark of how low she had been pushed. One cold evening, when the tears finally spilled uncontrollably, Jane looked at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. The eyes staring back were red-rimmed, but burning with a quiet fury. It was then she made a silent promise, not just to anyone else, but to herself, that she would reclaim her narrative on her own terms. Change wouldn't come easy or fast, and the path ahead was muddied with uncertainty, but she knew that surrender was not an option. Every glance she avoided, every whispered insult, every pang of insecurity, those were battles she would fight with every ounce of her being. It was in these moments of raw vulnerability that Jane began to understand something crucial. The world's perception wasn't her truth. Brandon's laughter, the cruel jokes at her expense, the cold shoulders, none of it could dissolve the core of who she was unless she allowed it. But the question remained, unspoken yet persistent. Could she rise above the humiliation, or would it define her forever? She wondered if anyone out there saw past the worn exterior to the fierce spirit silently waiting to break free. Sharing pieces of her story with strangers online, in small posts she wrote late at night, opened a crack of hope. There were others like her, others hurting but surviving in silence. In the background, the town went on, life flowing uncaringly as Jane navigated between waves of bitterness and moments of fragile hope. Brandon, distant and removed, remained oblivious to the upheaval his actions had caused, tangled in his own success and arrogance, unaware or indifferent to the wreckage left behind. Jane's humiliation had become more than a personal wound. It was a mirror, reflecting societal apathy toward those often overlooked and discarded. As the years stretched on, her resilience became less about proving anyone wrong and more about rediscovering the value sewn into her own soul. Have you ever felt like the world's laughter was at your expense? What did you do to find your strength again? Sometimes sharing those stories is the first step toward healing. Have you started yours? The journey to reclaim her life wasn't a straight path for Jane Carter. It was a winding road painted with moments of hope and setbacks that threatened to swallow her whole. After that cold day at the gas station, and the following weeks clouded with humiliation, Jane tried, desperately, to rise above the whispers and sneers of her community. She sought refuge in long shifts at the diner, washing plates until her hands were raw and aching, burying the sting of her heart beneath a mask of determination. Yet inside, doubts crept in like slow poison, whispering cruel questions she dared not voice aloud. Was she truly worthy of love? Could someone like Brandon ever be wrong? And more painfully, could she ever trust herself again? One evening, after a slogging 12-hour shift, Jane collapsed onto the worn couch in her cramped apartment. The glow of the streetlight outside filtered dimly through the threadbare curtains, casting soft patterns across her tired face. In moments like these, the weight of loneliness pressed down hardest, making it difficult to hold on to the fragile thread of hope she clung to. Memories of Brandon's grin haunted her like a bitter melody she couldn't switch off, looping over and over in her mind. She felt trapped in a cycle, trying to move forward, but always pulled back by the shadows of the past. Her family tried to support her the best they could. Her mother's embraces were soothing yet tinged with helplessness, and her little brother, once her source of joy, now seemed to ask unspoken questions with his wide eyes whenever Jane's smiles faltered. Outside the walls of her home, the judgment of neighbors and coworkers lingered like fog. The world outside saw her as damaged, fragile, and beneath notice. The invisible label attached to her, the girl left at the gas station, threatened to swallow every ounce of confidence she tried to build. Even the thought of trying to date again seemed impossible, like a cruel joke, reminding her that some doors had been slammed forever. In the midst of her solitude, a flicker of light appeared unexpectedly. One of her few friends, Maria, had always been a quiet presence in her life, someone who never judged and listened without interruption. Maria reached out one afternoon with a simple message: "You don't have to carry this alone." That message broke through the walls Jane had built around herself. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to speak openly, sharing the deepest parts of her pain. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start, an acknowledgement that vulnerability did not mean weakness. Slowly, Jane began exploring new paths to heal. She found solace in small acts, morning runs under the awakening sky, scribbling thoughts in a battered notebook, and volunteering at the local community center, where she met people who saw her as more than her past mistakes. The kindness she encountered there stirred something fragile yet fierce inside her. Moments of laughter with children needing support, thank you notes from the elderly she helped, and steady encouragement from her newfound circle became threads weaving a new tapestry of hope. But just as Jane began to feel the stirrings of real change, life introduced new challenges. The diner where she worked announced closures due to financial struggles. Her safety net frayed, leaving uncertainty to gnaw at her resolve. On top of that, the cruel ghosts of the past reemerged in unexpected ways. Brandon's name popped up on social media, flaunting his latest success and lavish lifestyle, a vivid reminder that the person who had left her behind was seemingly untouched by consequence. The contrast between his carefully curated life and her own fragile survival was a bitter pill that tasted like defeat. Yet, deep inside, Jane felt a stubborn ember glow, one that refused to be extinguished by bitterness. At the lowest points, she doubted her worth fiercely. Was she fooling herself with these fleeting sparks of hope? The nights she spent staring at the ceiling, wrestling with dark thoughts, were battles fought quietly but fiercely. Sometimes the urge to retreat into anonymity and surrender to despair was overwhelming. She realized that scars weren't just marks on the skin, but echoes in the soul that demanded healing. The process was gritty, uneven, and painfully slow, but she was learning to embrace it, step by tentative step. In these moments of fragile vulnerability, Jane found unexpected solace, the realization that healing required patience and self-compassion. She was no longer defined by a single moment or by Brandon's cruel abandonment. Instead, she began to see herself as a woman who had survived storms that might have broken others. There was a strength in her resilience, even if it was buried beneath layers of uncertainty and pain. A chance encounter at the community center with a mentor named Evelyn, whose own story was filled with hardship and triumph, offered Jane a new perspective. Evelyn's quiet confidence and unwavering belief in second chances ignited an inkling of belief in Jane's own possible future. "You don't have to be perfect to be powerful," Evelyn told her one afternoon, eyes steady and kind. "Sometimes the most beautiful strength grows from the cracks." Those words echoed within Jane, planting a sea of courage she had forgotten she possessed. But as the heaviness of the past still clung stubbornly, Jane wondered what it would truly take to rise from the shadows. Could she face Brandon again without collapsing under the weight of old wounds? What about you? Have you ever felt trapped by the ghosts of your past? Sometimes it takes just one person's kindness to spark a healing journey. Have you found that light within your darkness yet? Sharing these moments reminds us we're never truly alone. Jane Carter's world shattered all at once when the letter arrived, crisp and official-looking, slipping beneath her worn apartment door like an unwelcome visitor. Its contents were a stark declaration. The diner where she had worked for years was closing immediately due to bankruptcy. The reality of losing not just a job, but her fragile footing knocked the breath from her lungs. It wasn't merely about money. It was about identity, security, and the thin hope she'd been clutching so tenaciously. That same week, faced with mounting bills and the looming threat of eviction, Jane's solitude grew heavier, the weight of past humiliations pressing down harder than ever before. Her nights were restless, plagued by memories of that cold gas station, where a decade earlier Brandon had left her alone, not just physically abandoned, but emotionally discarded, as if her existence had been a cruel joke. Then the most unexpected phone call pierced her bleak routine. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but firm and familiar nonetheless. It belonged to a manager at the new community outreach program, a newly launched initiative in town, who had seen Jane volunteering and recognized something rare in her. But the surprise didn't stop there. Brandon's name surfaced during the call. Jane's heart thudded painfully. The program, funded partly by a business conglomerate, was under Brandon's ownership, connecting the past and present in a tangled knot neither of them anticipated. The man who once left me by the gas pumps was now involved in a venture that could, perhaps, shape her future. The idea of working alongside him stirred a storm of anxiety and guarded hope within her. Her mind raced with questions and doubts. Could she face him without crumbling? Would he recognize the woman standing before him, a woman bruised but resolute? The idea of stepping into his world, a place of success and polished appearances, seemed intimidating. A chasm between their lives that threatened to swallow her whole. Yet, buried beneath the fear, a flicker of defiance ignited. This was not a chance she could afford to pass up. If Brandon thought she was still the same girl who'd been left behind, he was about to learn just how much she had changed. Arriving at the sleek office building for her interview, Jane felt the familiar prickling of eyes, curious, skeptical, some perhaps doubting her presence there. The contrast between her modest dress and the polished suits around her was glaring, filling her with a mix of discomfort and determination. Throughout the interview, Brandon's imposing figure lingered at the periphery of her thoughts. When their eyes finally met, the tension was electric. Behind his confident smile, she glimpsed the ghosts of their past, a past he hadn't yet acknowledged, though she couldn't move past without confronting it. Days passed before Jane received the call that she had been accepted for a position in the program. Working alongside Brandon meant entering uncharted waters, but the opportunity was a lifeline, a way out from the shadows of unemployment and self-doubt. The first days on the job were a delicate dance of professionalism and buried emotions. Brandon maintained a cool distance, businesslike yet sharp, as if determined to forget what had happened years ago. Jane found herself searching for moments of strength within her racing heart, reminding herself that the girl abandoned at a gas station had grown into a woman who deserved respect and dignity. Then came the turning point. One afternoon, during a community event, a crisis erupted, a family in urgent need of support that no one else seemed willing or prepared to help. Without hesitation, Jane stepped forward, her genuine compassion turning the moment into a quiet triumph. Those who witnessed her courage began to look at her differently, the volunteers, the staff, even Brandon. For the first time in a long time, Jane saw glimmers of respect and acknowledgement where there had been dismissal and silence. Brandon's reaction was complex. Behind his cool exterior, flashes of surprise and something like regret flickered when he observed Jane's unwavering dedication. Unable to deny the woman before him, he started to question his own past cruelty. The laughter at the gas station playing back in his mind with a bitter new edge. What had once seemed a harmless joke was now a haunting revelation of how deeply he had hurt someone who had only ever sought love and trust. The transformation in their dynamic shifted slowly but undeniably. Brandon's encounters with Jane grew less guarded, tinged with awkward attempts at apology, though the wounds between them ran deep. Jane, empowered by her courage and the support around her, began to reclaim her voice, the voice that had been silenced by humiliation. The people who once dismissed her began to see her not as a forgotten girl, but as a pillar of strength and resilience. Have you ever experienced a moment when everything you feared was waiting for you face to face? How did you find the courage to confront your past? Sometimes, the hardest battles bring the most profound victories, and those moments can start with the smallest steps forward. The room was thick with tension the moment Jane Carter stepped into the sleek conference hall, a sharp contrast to the worn diner booths and cramped apartment where she had spent so many years rebuilding herself. Today was more than just another workday. It was a reckoning, a confrontation long overdue. The event was a company-wide meeting, and Brandon was at the center of it, commanding attention with his typical arrogance and tallish charm. Yet, as Jane took her seat among the crowd, she felt every eye flicker toward her, some with surprise, others with thinly veiled skepticism. But this time, Jane carried herself differently. Beneath the modest blouse and simple skirt was a woman whose scars had matured into scars of strength. Brandon's voice rolled across the room as he unveiled plans for a new project, his empire expanding, his influence growing. Yet beneath the bravado, Jane saw something fragile, a flicker of discomfort whenever their eyes met. The crowd buzzed with excitement, but Jane's focus sharpened as he spoke, waiting for the moment she knew was coming. The moment she would no longer be the girl abandoned at a gas station, but the woman who had risen above it all. After the presentation, backstage moments were heavy with unspoken words. Brandon approached Jane with a cautious expression, his usual smugness replaced by something quieter, less certain. The years of distance dissolved as he admitted, voice low and hesitant, how deeply regrettable his past actions were. "I thought it was a joke, Jane," he confessed, eyes searching hers for some shred of forgiveness. "I was wrong. I see that now. I'm sorry, truly." Jane felt a complex storm within her. The whirlwind of old wounds reopening mingled with a strange sense of closure. The man who had once mocked her pain was here, vulnerable in a way she never imagined witnessing. But her humility did not tangle with naivety. She chose her words carefully, firm yet tempered. "I needed you to see what you did," she said, voice steady. "Not to hurt me further, but so you could understand. I'm not that scared, broken girl anymore. I am strong because I survived." That confession marked a turning point. The once impenetrable divide between them softened, shifting from bitter resentment toward a tentative, fragile respect. It was not about rekindling the past, but rather acknowledging the growth that had carried them both beyond pain. Brandon, humbled and chastened, faced real consequences beyond regret. His company's community recognized the courage it took Jane to stand tall and demand recognition, and whispers about the gas station incident faded, replaced by stories of her resilience. Outside the boardrooms and staged events, Jane's transformation rippled through her daily life. Longtime acquaintances who had doubted her now sought her out, inspired by her refusal to be defined by a single moment of humiliation. Doors that once appeared closed creaked open. New opportunities emerged as her confidence blossomed. Through it all, Jane remained grounded, reminded that success was not simply about public acclaim but the quiet victories within. Yet, the journey was not without internal battles. Nightly, fragments of that gas station memory stirred shadows within her mind, tempting her with despair just when hope seemed brightest. But each time, she met those ghosts with determination. Remembering Evelyn's words about strength blooming from cracks and Maria's unwavering friendship, Jane had learned to embrace both her vulnerabilities and her power, crafting a new narrative where she was no longer the victim but the author of her own life. One afternoon, as she watched children delightedly play at the community center, Jane reflected on how far she'd come. The woman who once felt invisible and discarded now radiated quiet confidence and warmth. Brandon's apology, though important, had become a footnote to her true victory, her unshakable belief in herself. Her scars, once sources of pain, had transformed into symbols of survival and hope. What about you? Have you found the courage to confront those who hurt you, and in doing so, discovered your own strength? Sometimes, standing tall is the most powerful form of justice we can give ourselves. Sharing your story can inspire others to do the same. The months that followed the confrontation marked a new chapter in Jane Carter's life. a chapter defined not by the shadows of past humiliation, but by the bright colors of self-respect, growth, and newfound opportunity. The community center, where she poured her heart into helping others, blossomed into a sanctuary, not just for those she aided, but for herself. Jane's daily routine shifted from surviving to thriving, each small success a testament to her resilience. Her quiet determination had blossomed into recognition, invitations to speak at local events, offers to mentor young women facing their own struggles, and the steady stream of gratitude from those she touched filled her with a warmth that no amount of past pain could extinguish. Brandon, too, remained a part of this evolving story, though no longer as the arrogant figure who once abandoned her without a thought. His apology had opened a door, but it was Jane who held the key. Their interactions became civil, cautious but genuine. Two people who had faced their own flaws and emerged changed. Brandon's bitterness had been softened by the realization of the impact of his callousness, and with her quiet strength as a mirror, he sought to make amends through humble actions rather than empty words. Still, Jane understood the true power lay not in the forgiveness she offered, but in her refusal to be defined by the pain he caused. On quiet mornings, Jane often sat by the window of her modest apartment, the soft morning light filtering through the curtains, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. The once crippling humiliation of being left stranded at a gas station, a memory that had once felt like a tombstone marking the loss of her dignity, now felt like a distant echo. A catalyst that pushed her beyond limits she had never imagined crossing. The pain never fully disappeared, but it became a reference point, a reminder of the depth of her courage and the distance she had traveled from that vulnerable woman, alone, tear-streaked and forgotten. Jane's story, shared quietly over coffee with a new friend or boldly in front of a gathering, became a beacon for many. It carried a simple yet profound message. That worth is not measured by the cruelty others inflict, but by the strength with which we rise after it. Her journey wasn't about revenge or bitterness, but about reclaiming self-love and dignity amid life's darkest moments. In that reclamation, she found freedom, the freedom to dream, to love, and to be seen truly. The local paper, once indifferent to her struggles, now featured her initiatives and community work, a testament to the power of perseverance over pain. As the sun dipped below the horizon one warm summer evening, Jane stood outside the community center, watching a group of young women laughing and supporting each other. She felt a swell of pride, not just for them, but for herself. Her story was no longer a chain, but a set of wings. The gas station abandonment that had once seemed like the end had become a beginning, proof that even the deepest wounds could seed incredible strength. Have you ever faced moments that seemed too painful to bear, but later became the turning points of your life? Remember, your story has value, and sharing it can inspire resilience in others. Never forget, the courage to rise again is the greatest victory one can achieve. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button. See you in our next story.